Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another WSR live streaming session. Today, we're going to continue with our discussions on a variety of topics as we move through the next phase of the environmental assessment process after the TOR approval. Every other week on Wednesdays at this same time, we will discuss a new topic, and we want to encourage you in doing these sessions to provide as much input as possible by calling or texting us with your questions or comments. And that number, as you can probably see on your screen, is 1-844-424-0500. And we are, just to remind everyone that the reason that we're doing these radio shows and streaming sessions is to help community members and the general public better understand what is involved in the federal impact assessment and the provincial environmental assessment processes, and encourage viewers and listeners to participate in these two activities. And with me today is my co-host, Marian Tibor McMahon, who is the Deputy Project Manager for ICE on the Webequate Supply Road project. Hello, Marian. Welcome back again
Hello.
for another round of live streaming.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You getting comfortable again in the co-host chair?
I am, yes. It's like the good
That's
old
good.
time.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's right. So, okay. One thing before we start, one thing I wanted to point out was in a radio show we did earlier today, we got a text from a community member very late in the show requesting a song, which we will honor next in 2 weeks. I promise you that. And but they also had a question. It was a comment and then a question after that. And I'll read the comment slash question to you. And so the question was, many roads are practically connected already from reserve to reserve, such as Wapakeka to Big Trout Lake, Woonaman to Kingfisher, Bearskin to Muskrat. The question is, who benefits if the reserves have started the process prior to the proposed supply road? Does any group take control of income or security? So I think the person asking the question is if these roads start to become connected, who takes responsibility for this, for these roads? And to be honest with you, even just the Webequate Supply Road itself, that issue has not been addressed yet. We're still in the EA phase, like the planning phase for the road. So that hasn't been addressed. Maybe at some point in the next year or two, they'll start discussions on that look at issues like that. So right now, they haven't been looked at in any great detail. But so we can't really provide an answer to you, but we do appreciate the comment. And as I said, well, I promise you we'll honor your music request in 2 weeks at our next session. So okay, maybe I'll tell you a bit about today's session. So today's session is called What We Have Heard, Key Themes of Project Questions and Concerns. And in this session, we're going to talk about the feedback so far from Indigenous communities on the Webequate Supply Road project. And to make things easier for discussion, what we've done is we've grouped together these comments and questions into themes. And then so we have a number of themes that we're going to discuss, talk about what kind of questions we got under those themes. So why don't we get started, Marion?
Sure, let's get into it.
Maybe you can do a quick run through of what we're going to cover today, just to give our viewers a big picture.
Sure, sounds good. So, tech team, slide 2, please. So for today, we'll be talking about a few things. First, we'll just give everybody a little project update and an overview as to where we are at right now in the project. And then we will go over the opportunities to engage with the project team and opportunities for, Indigenous communities and stakeholders to provide feedback. And then we will talk about who we have heard from to date and what we have heard so far from Indigenous communities based on the themes of the concerns and questions that we received. And then we will wrap up and provide a little preview as to what will be discussed in our next live stream in 2 weeks.
Thank you, Marian. Tech team, move to slide 2, please.
3.
Slide 3. Sorry, slide 3. Thanks, Marian.
No
Okay,
problem.
so slide 3. Where are we now? So just to give you an idea of what's going on in the project for those who haven't been following closely, there was a big milestone that was reached on October 8th of 2021, and that was the approval of the Webequate Supply Road Environmental Assessment Terms of Reference. So this was approved by MECP, and what this means is we then move into what's called the environmental assessment phase of the work. And that's where all the heavy lifting is done in terms of the studies, and so that that is where we're focusing now. So we're in the process of conducting those studies. Some of the work had been started before the terms of reference had been approved, which is normal because this process takes a very long time, and we know a lot about what is expected by the federal and provincial regulators. So these processes can get started early. So um, Marian, why don't you talk a bit now about the many opportunities at different points of the provincial and federal environmental impact assessment process for input from community members?
Sure. So if we could go to slide 4, please, tech team. So I'll just say that the Webequate Supply Road Environmental Assessment and Impact Assessment, we're going through a coordinated federal provincial process, right? So we're going to be creating one impact assessment or environmental assessment into one document. And as you can see here, there are people icons at various stages here throughout the process, and those are the various times and opportunities to engage with us, the project team, to provide your feedback to inform the environmental assessment or impact assessment. So currently, where this yellow star is, that is where we are at. We are in the environmental assessment phase, and currently the team is conducting studies to collect baseline information to characterize, the current environmental conditions. And there are times there where communities and the public and stakeholders can also provide us feedback there, just to ensure, that we are studying the right things, maybe provide input on, study areas and things like that for the various components that we are studying. So, as well as, once the environmental assessment or impact assessment is drafted, we will also go out and engage with communities and the public and stakeholders to seek feedback on that as well. And then we will take that feedback and incorporate it into the environmental assessment. So there are plenty of opportunities to engage with the team. It just doesn't happen during the terms of reference phase. It's going to happen throughout, and communities will be hearing from us throughout the project at different stages to seek input and feedback.
Thank you, Marian. Tech team, let's move to slide 5. And we're going to talk a little bit, expand a little bit on what you were talking about. So if we can bring up slide number 5, there we are. So as Marian was talking about, the feedback opportunities on the project are ongoing. So they're formal and informal. There's the formal review periods for providing feedback, but there's other what we would call informal or outside of the official review periods opportunities for that back and forth communication with the project team. So you know, we what we're trying to do on this project and all the projects we do is to be as transparent as possible and keep those lines of communication with community members as open as possible so we can get that feedback from you and use that to shape and to shape the work that we do and take it all into consideration because it's all valuable information and we've tried to this open approach has has evolved, and COVID-19, a pandemic, has caused us to really develop some new methods, or apply existing methods to a new sort of application. So we've been doing a lot of different kinds of engagement. We've been doing some community sessions, where we've been able to, like in-person community sessions. We community drop-in sessions, where protocols permit. We've been doing virtual community presentations using, through Zoom calls and Teams calls, and vehicles like that. Teleconferences, of course. There's been opportunities to provide input through online surveys as well. And we're constantly trying new methods. We've been using a whole bunch of different techniques via social media to get the word out and involve as many community members as possible, because we want community members to understand what's going on through this process and give us their input, so we get as broad a range of opinions on the project as possible. We've also, Marian, as you know, been doing topic specific live streaming sessions, right? Like tutorial like sessions, haven't we?
Yes, that is correct. So we'll be focusing on different topics. So if there's, a topic that interests you, certainly tune in and you'll be able to receive more information that way. And there's plenty of information on the website as well, where we've got newsletters and fact sheets and tutorial videos again on the different disciplines that will be studied throughout the environmental assessment.
Now, that's a good point you brought up the website, Marion, because that is a huge source of information for this project. And there's a lot on there. There's a lot on there on that website. And we welcome you to jump into it and have a look, and take a look at some of the videos. There's a lot of information available there. So maybe let's move on now to sort of the core of the discussion today. And let's first talk about who we've heard from in terms of Indigenous communities or organizations. Marion, can you run through maybe some of the groups that we've heard from so far on the project?
Sure. For sure. So that's slide 6, tech team. So we heard a lot from Indigenous communities, and as you can see here, there were about 15 Indigenous communities that we received comments and have met with and heard from. And then we also heard from about 3, tribal councils or Indigenous organizations that also provided some feedback as well that we are taking into consideration and moving forward with in the EA.
Thanks, Marion. That's a big, broad response, isn't it? Many communities from a huge geographic area, lots of different interests. So we got a real variety of input. Okay, let's move on now to slide number 7, tech team. And this is really the core of today's discussion. And as I mentioned before, we grouped the comments or questions into different themes, and there's a number of themes, um, and they all have quite a few comments associated with them. So what we're going to do is we're going to, with the time we've got, run through the type of input that we've gotten under each of the themes. So maybe, Marion, you can kick things off by talking a bit about the Aboriginal and treaty rights and interest theme. That was a big one, wasn't it?
Yes, very big. So we received a lot of concerns and questions related to the protection of impacts on rights and interests of Indigenous peoples. We're hearing that there could be potential effects on Indigenous land use and loss of way of life, right? Because they're worried about accessing areas to do their traditional activities like fishing, hunting, and gathering, right? So that was a big concern that we've heard so far related to that.
No, you're right, Marion. And there was another one I remember at one point in time, which was effects on governance or jurisdiction over an area with a road having been put through um, a community's traditional homeland. So, there's a lot to this. There's a lot of layers to this. This is a very big subject area. And, the you and I have talked about a bit about this before. Indigenous knowledge, right? That's a big part
Hmm.
of this category. And previously on environmental assessments, Indigenous knowledge was sort of tucked away in its own little compartment, wasn't it? In the EA document, and that's not the case anymore, is it, Marion?
No, it's not. It's a big part of our environmental assessment, right? And that's part of the federal regulations as well, is to have Indigenous knowledge inform the impact assessment, and it informs all the disciplines really that are being studied throughout, right? And it has to be interwoven or integrated into the assessment.
It's so true, and this is a relatively new concept of sort of combining that Western science, right, with the indigenous knowledge and being able to combine them together to sort of paint a picture of the current situation and to look at what potential impacts might be based on all that sort of holistic collection of information. So it's a big subject area. Let's move on to the next one, and maybe you can sort of lay this one out for us. It's cumulative effects and the need for regional assessment.
Yes, this is another key concern or topic where we hear a lot about. We're hearing a lot that there should be a comprehensive cumulative effects assessment that captures, the future proposed mining and infrastructure development in the Ring of Fire. So to study that um, all together and to understand what those cumulative effects might be, right?
So, for example, you look at WSR, it covers a pretty big geographic area, right? The road runs
Hmm.
107 kilometers. And beside it are two other neighboring projects, both in environmental assessment, the Northern Road Link and the Martin Falls Community Access Road. So you've got three projects together whose total length would be, let's say, 500 plus kilometers of road covering a large geographic area. So you can see why community members would request that this be looked at regionally because it covers such a big geographic area covering many watersheds as well. So um, one thing I should point out is that each one of these environmental assessments has their own cumulative effects assessment done. And that is expected to look at all reasonably foreseeable projects. So projects that are from the past, current projects, and planned projects in the future that are reasonably foreseeable. So sort of baked into each one of these EAs, Marion, is a cumulative effects assessment, but um, with the regional assessment by the federal government, that takes it sort of to another level, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, let's look at the next theme. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about this one. This is another thing that we got a lot of input on, and this was protocols and consultation process.
Yes, so we've heard a lot from communities about this and just reminding us to respect and follow community specific protocols for engagement and consultation, which is what we do. Before we go out and engage with an Indigenous community, we will ask them what their engagement protocols are so that way we are engaging in the methods and following their process accordingly. And of course, now given around COVID, where we have to pivot and figure out new ways of engaging with communities. And we have to ensure that we are following those protocols as well. Right. And if it's something doing over virtual, then making sure that, we are following their methods and their process.
No, that's exactly it, Marion. And these have been unprecedented times with
Hmm.
COVID-19 going on for the last almost 2 years now. It's been very difficult to do the consultation. We acknowledge that, and that's why, like you said, we've pivoted. We've tried to come up with new approaches, new ways of engaging with communities, and and have helped, to communities in getting technology to be able to provide that input to this project and other projects as well. So, um, and by developing these new methods, we're hopefully making things easier in the future for other projects, even when there isn't a pandemic, right? And because in theory, we may not have to always be traveling to communities, or we can do that just as much as we did before and have additional engagement through some of the virtual methods as well. So, yeah, this has been a big one. We've got a lot of input on this, and we've also, responded to a lot of the input on protocols or consultation. Um, by extending review periods for both the draft tour and the proposed tour on a number of occasions as well. So, we've all tried to sort of adapt to these challenging times, and those are just a few examples. So, okay, maybe now let's move on to the next key theme, another one that we got. I mean, so many themes, right? And we got a lot of input on each of these themes. But the next one is environmental assessment, impact assessment, mainly process, really, right, Marian?
Yes, mostly related to process and Crown's duty to consult. And what are the roles and responsibilities there with the government going out engaging with communities versus the proponent. Also, consideration and evaluation of alternatives, the routing of the road, as well as location and potential effects of having supportive infrastructure there. Looking at the aggregate or the rock area, ramps, and temporary access roads, all of that associated with the construction activities. And we hear a lot about potential effects to downstream communities, mostly related to peatlands and water quality.
No, that's very, very true. Okay, another theme that we have gotten a lot of input on, and evidence was the first question that we got on the radio show that I talked about a bit about at the beginning of the streaming session was ownership and maintenance or operations of the road, wasn't it, Marion? That was a big one.
Yes, we got a lot of questions related to that. So, tech team, that's actually slide 8. So we got questions around who will use the road, who's going to own and operate the road, who's going to maintain the road. So a lot of questions related to that.
Yeah, that's a big one. It's a big one, Marion, and there's no clear answers, right, to these questions at the moment. Like I was saying at the beginning, is because right now it's just an environmental assessment. It's not looking at ownership of the road. I mean, that's certainly an important factor, or our maintenance of the road, and it's certainly something that's going to require a lot more attention, I think, down the road as as this project gets closer to the end of the environmental assessment process. I think it'll be important for these issues to be discussed. And these are big issues, right? Like who will pay for it? Who will own it? Who will regulate the road? What about security? What about road security? This is a big issue for community members. Road security, road access. Um, you know, uh, there may need to be some controls in place so that the area doesn't get overrun with hunters and fishermen, for example. These, there's issues of, you know, because of jurisdiction of the road. Would it require licensing? Would it require insurance? In all likelihood, it would. But these are all things that have to be considered, right? Who would be doing enforcement of the road? Lots of factors. So this is a big one, very, 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 very big one. Next one, another big one, and one of your favorites is socioeconomic impacts. Why don't you tell us a bit about that one, Marion?
That's right. So we hear a lot from communities the need to look at potential social and economic impacts, whether that be negative or positive. Because, it's not just the environment there, like, a physical, biological environment that might be impacted, but it's the social environment as well. And looking at the social well being of communities, right? So, how might businesses be impacted? Because there could be opportunities there for businesses, potential opportunities for training and employment, and how might the project increase economic activity there, in terms of mineral exploration or forestry, even, right? So that's going to be a big study that's going to be done as part of the environmental assessment.
Yeah, huge one, Marion, huge one. And we have gotten input from community members in Webequate and other communities, but to make sure that we accurately capture existing conditions when it comes to social services, infrastructure, etc., because that's important that current picture be painted accurately, because the road itself is not going to be the solution to all communities' issues. Other elements are involved in helping communities raise themselves up economically. So there's a lot more to it than just building a road. So another one is climate change and greenhouse gas emissions, isn't it, Marion? That's a big one. We hear that one a lot, don't we?
Yep, we do. We hear about that one a lot, and mostly around, how is climate change going to be taken into consideration throughout the assessment, right? Because, we're in a sensitive area where there are peatlands and muskeg, which are the carbon sinks in northern Ontario. So that's a big thing that we hear about from communities.
So true. Really important area. It takes a lot of requires a lot of attention, understandably. A lot of community members from not only from Webequate but neighboring communities are very concerned about impacts on that. And climate change could is a huge issue in terms of the design of the road through these areas, because of the potential for more extreme weather events causing flow levels to go up, for example. And so all that information has to be considered and sort of built into the design process of the road. So, because everyone has seen, community members tell us all the time that the winter road season is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And so we all see it. So it has to be considered when we plan this road going forward. So, okay, next one. Second last but not least is water quality, Marion. Maybe talk a little bit about that one.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot of concerns around potential effects to water quality and fish, particularly around the release of contaminants, right? So there's concern there about spills, contaminating the water. We also hear a lot of concerns related to methyl mercury levels as well, which could affect the water and the fish.
Yeah, it's a big one, Marion, and you and I know at community meetings, a lot of the comments and input we get are express concern about water, and so we've made a pretty significant effort over the last couple of years to show community members that water is looked at in great detail, whether it's groundwater or surface water, and it's looked at over seasons. And there's a lot of attention paid to water because it's so important. And you look at a community like Webequate, which the settlement actually sits on an island. There's so much water on the reserve. It's absolutely critical. So that we pay a lot of attention to that topic. And so, last but not least is wildlife and plants, Marion. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure, that's also a key theme that we hear quite often, and rightfully so, where community members are concerned about potential effects to wildlife and plants, like birds, caribou, fish, berries, and how this may impact, their harvesting and their traditional activities like hunting, because, ultimately, that could affect, indigenous people's health and rights, right? If wildlife and plants are impacted.
That's so true, Marion. And like I said, these projects cover large geographic areas. Animals like caribou, some species of caribou, like the more of the tundra species of caribou, have much larger ranges. So potentially this could impact them and their movements and behavior. And so these are all things that have to be taken into consideration. And believe me, we're spending a lot of time and effort studying larger mammals such as caribou, for example, as well as wolverine, to understand, the way what's going on right now, so that we can be able to sort of monitor things going forward. So it looks like we're almost out of time here, Marian, and given that, I guess we should talk about what's coming up next, eh?
Yeah.
Well, let me just fill everyone in on February 9th, Wednesday, February 9th, again, 2:30 to 3:30. We're going to be doing another streaming session and radio show on the environmental assessment and impact assessment processes, the provincial and federal processes respectively. So we'll explain these processes in a little bit more detail. And then on February 23rd, 2 weeks after that, we're going to start talking about Indigenous knowledge with our first part, which is about whose topic is what is Indigenous knowledge. So um, that wraps up this week's streaming session. Thanks for joining me again, Marian. It
Thank you.
was a
Thanks for
busy
having
30
me.
minutes, wasn't it?
That flew by very quickly.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, it really flies by. And anyway, I just want to welcome everyone to join us again in 2 weeks and talk about the EAIA process. And please visit, as Marian mentioned earlier, our website at supplyroad.ca. Look for us on social media at WFN Supply Road. Please don't hesitate to reach out and contact us if you have questions or comments. And we will see you again in 2 weeks. Miigwech.